When the ice storm hit, I thought the silence was beautiful, until I realized it wasn't silence at all. Something was moving out there, beneath the frozen world, and once it noticed me, it never stopped. The night the ice storm hit, I remember thinking the world looked unreal, like a dead painting frozen beneath a glass sheet. Everything was coated in a layer of ice so thick it made the trees bow like they were praying. The power lines drooped dangerously low over the road leading to my uncle's cabin, where I had decided, stupidly, to spend the weekend alone. I thought the isolation might help me clear my head after months of stress at work. I never imagined that isolation would become something else, something that felt alive, hungry, pressing against the edges of the world until nothing familiar remained. The storm warnings had flashed across the radio all afternoon, urging people to stay home, to avoid travel, to keep generators ready, but I had laughed it off, thinking a little cold wouldn't scare me. I grew up with winters that could split wood, winters that could swallow entire cars in snowbanks. But an ice storm is different. It doesn't bury the world, it entombs it. By the time I reached the cabin, the temperature had already plummeted. The road behind me slicked over with a glistening shell of ice that cracked under my tires like fragile glass. When I stepped out of the car, the air felt sharp, so cold it burned, and the woods around the house were silent in a way that didn't feel natural. I got the fire going, heated some canned soup, and tried to ignore the feeling that something was off. Something about the way the trees stood too still, coated in thick ice that distorted their shapes into twisted silhouettes that could have passed for people watching from a distance. By midnight, the storm was in full force, sheets of freezing rain hammering the windows, coating the porch, the roof, the trees, everything with more and more ice until the world outside seemed to blur into a frozen nightmare. I tried to call my uncle to tell him I'd arrived safely, but the signal was gone, replaced by static and a faint, rhythmic crackling I blamed on the storm. It didn't sound like weather interference, though. It sounded like something tapping, slowly, steadily from far away. I went to bed after convincing myself it was nothing, but sometime deep in the night, long after the fire had died to embers, a loud crack woke me. It was so sharp it jolted my heart into my throat. I sat up to hear the distant, booming shatter of falling trees, weighed down by tons of ice, collapsing one after another like giants breaking in half. I told myself not to panic, it was just nature doing its violent winter work. But then another sound came, closer this time. A slow creaking at the side of the cabin, like wood strained under pressure, like weight pressing against the wall. I held my breath, listening harder, and the creaking shifted into a scraping, like something sliding across the ice-packed ground just outside my window. I pulled the blankets to my chest, not daring to move, and the scraping paused right beneath my window. For a sickening moment, the whole cabin felt held in tension, like the world itself was listening. When nothing else happened, I forced myself to lie back, staring at the ceiling until sleep eventually pinned me down. It wasn't real sleep, just a heavy drifting filled with strange dreams of shapes moving slowly between frozen trees, their limbs too long, their movements too smooth. At dawn, a gray glow filtered through the frosted windows, and I got dressed quickly, eager to get home before the roads grew worse. But when I stepped outside, the icy air punching the breath from my lungs, I saw immediately that leaving wasn't an option. The entire driveway was blocked by a massive fallen tree, its trunk split and glistening under inches of clear ice, its branches sprawled out like shattered bones. I should have turned back inside and made the best of it, but curiosity tugged at me because something about the tree felt wrong. The branches weren't broken randomly. They were bent downward, all angled toward the cabin, as if pulled or guided before they snapped. I stepped closer, my boots slipping on the ice, and felt a chill run through me that had nothing to do with the cold. The ice on the trunk was smoothed, almost polished, like something had run its hands along the bark over and over. I went back inside quickly, locked the door, and tried again to call for help. The phone remained dead, only now the static had a pattern to it, a faint ticking like fingernails against glass. The hours dragged by in eerie quiet, broken only by the occasional thunderous crack from the woods. But by late afternoon the cabin felt wrong, foreign, claustrophobic, as if the storm wasn't just outside but seeping into the walls, pressing its cold weight inward. Then, around dusk, the power went out entirely, leaving me with only the faint orange glow of the fire and the oppressive sound of the freezing rain. I lit a lantern and checked the windows, and that's when I noticed it, shapes in the ice coating the glass. They were faint at first, like smudges, but as I leaned closer, my stomach nodded. They were handprints. Not fingerprints, not like a human hand. These had too many joints, too long, too narrow, each finger ending in sharp points etched into the ice like claws. I stumbled back, heart pounding violently, and as I stared at the window, one of the prints slowly, visibly deepened, as if something outside pressed harder. I grabbed a log from the firewood pile, ready to swing at anything breaking in, but the cabin stayed still. Minutes passed without another sound, and I forced myself to step closer. The handprint had melted slightly around the edges, the only warmth coming from inside the cabin. Whatever made it wasn't human. That night the scraping returned, louder, circling the cabin in long, dragging arcs, like something moved on all fours or slid across the ice. I sat by the fire, gripping the log, every muscle in my body trembling, listening to the creature's slow patrol around the walls, hearing the shifting ice crack beneath its weight. Sometimes it paused, and when it did, the silence felt alive. The worst moment came when the scraping stopped directly outside the front door, and I heard another sound, one that froze my blood solid. 3 slow taps. Tap, tap, like a knock. I didn't move, didn't breathe. The tapping came again, softer this time, almost curious. When it finally stopped, I didn't relax. I stayed awake until dawn, refusing to let the fire die, refusing to let darkness swallow the cabin. In the morning I saw that the door had long, deep scratches gouged into it, marks that cut through wood and into the metal beneath. The creature had wanted in. The storm only worsened through the day, trapping me in a world of ice and silence, until the isolation felt suffocating, pressing against my skull like static. I thought about running through the woods for help, but the cold was too lethal and something was out there, waiting. By late afternoon the sky darkened unnaturally early, as if the storm wanted to hide the sun, and I noticed new sounds outside, faint chittering, like teeth clicking together, moving between the trees. When night fell again, I heard multiple sets of scraping, not one creature, several. They circled the cabin in slow, synchronized movements, stopping frequently beneath the windows as if studying the weak points. When the fire suddenly crackled loudly, everything outside went silent for a full minute. Then, from the far corner of the cabin, came a sound so quietly deliberate it made my skin crawl. A soft, dragging whisper against the wood, followed by another handprint forming on the frosted window, this time from the inside. I screamed and swung the lantern toward the window, expecting something to leap out, but the glass was intact, the handprint fading slowly in the heat. Somehow, the cold had seeped through, forming the shape from outside. Hours passed in terror as the scraping grew more restless, tapping and dragging intensifying until the entire cabin felt surrounded. I heard heavy thumps on the roof, one first, then two, then more, until it sounded like several bodies crawling across the ice-laden shingles. I hid in the corner near the fireplace, clutching the log like a useless weapon, and whispered prayers I hadn't spoken since childhood. At some point deep in the night, the tapping stopped all at once, as if a signal passed between them. The silence was suffocating. Then a single, slow crack echoed overhead, followed by a long creak as the ice shifted. I realized with mounting horror that the weight on the roof was too much. The ice, the creatures, the storm in the cabin groaned under the pressure. I backed toward the door, unsure whether to run or hide, when a large chunk of ice slid down the side of the cabin with a thundering crash, shaking the entire structure. That was when I heard it, a sound that didn't come from ice or weather. A voice, a low, rasping whisper muffled through the wall, calling my name. It came again, closer, distorted, like it was echoing through a frozen throat. I bolted for the door, unlocked it with shaking hands, and ran into the storm. The cold hit me like knives, the wind howling so violently it tore the breath from my lungs, but I didn't stop. Behind me, shapes dropped from the roof, landing on the ice with wet, heavy thuds. I didn't dare turn around. The woods were pitch black, but I ran blindly, slipping, falling, scrambling up again, until I saw a distant flicker of headlights through the storm. A plow truck? I screamed until my voice broke, and the driver must have seen me because the truck slowed, the door opening, a hand reaching out. I collapsed inside, sobbing, shaking uncontrollably, unable to form words. The driver took one look at my face, then at the darkness behind me, and sped away without asking questions. The cabin was found 2 days later after the storm ended, nearly crushed beneath fallen ice and trees. But no one could explain the deep claw marks covering the walls, the roof torn in long channels, or the handprints frozen into the outer windows prints that didn't match any animal. The police dismissed it as storm damage. My uncle said the ice could create weird shapes. But I know what I heard, what I saw, what followed me in the freezing dark. And every winter since, when the first freezing rain starts tapping at my apartment windows, I hear it again, that faint, rhythmic crackling in the static, like claws dragging across ice, growing louder each year, like the storm hasn't forgotten me, like something out there still remembers my name. If this story made you listen to the winter wind differently, don't leave yet. Like the video to keep the cold from creeping in. Subscribe so you're never alone when the storm returns, and watch another nightmare on the channel. Stopping now is when the scratching begins.